The Derek Chauvin jury trial. So today's video is a quick critique of the defense questioning of one of the potential jurors, juror number 42 in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. What I'm going to do is talk about what, from my perspective as a jury consultant, kind of what my thought process would be as we analyze some of the exchanges between the lawyer and this prospective juror, juror number 42. Let me just give you a brief background of what jury selection is. It's really not jury selection, it's jury deselection. So lawyers can't pick who it is that they want to serve as jurors on any particular case. They can only deselect potential jurors from sitting on the trial. And they can do this one or two ways. The attorneys have what they call peremptory challenges, and each side has a limited amount of peremptory challenges that they can use to remove a juror for any reason. But it can't be for ethnicity, gender, race, or religious reasons. Now, another way that a juror could be removed from a case or from serving as a juror is through what's called a challenge for cause. Now, the judge makes that determination, but he or she only makes that determination after the attorney who's asking the questions makes a motion for a challenge for cause to have a particular juror removed, and then the judge decides whether or not that motion should be granted. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you a couple clips of some exchanges between juror number 42 and Mr. Nelson, and then I'll give you my perspective as a jury consultant, what I would be thinking given what this prospective juror said.
I am going to ask you a series of questions that are kind of general in their nature first, and then I'm going to follow up with some specifics on your questionnaire. Again, we all understand that it's been a couple months since you've read this, and nobody's trying to trick you or anything of that nature, okay? Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I may say that from time to time. I'm not trying to be rude. It's just, again, to get the record correct. All right?
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, right there, I already noticed something that was kind of a red flag for me. Her tone is a little bit defensive. She says, mm-hmm, and then he says, is that a yes? And she says, yes. But she does it in a way that is not a very friendly interaction. So that's just a red flag. It's not necessarily telling one way or another, but I would note that.
Now, can you think of in your personal life, whether it be in a professional context or in a familial context or even within your friend group, where you've been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Yes.
Okay. Without giving us any major details about that conflict, how did you go about trying to resolve that conflict?
One specific one I'm thinking was between two people, and I just tried to be a mediator in that situation and help them talk it through.
Okay. Now, you understand that if you were to be selected as a juror on this case, you would be in a room with 11 other people and some conflict about things may come up.
Yes.
Would you expect that to happen?
Yes.
Would you, how would you approach that situation if you were in the jury room and two different jurors had a conflict over some piece of information? What would you do?
I would listen to both sides and again try to hear what both people are saying. And I mean, in that situation in the office, I would have to also say my thoughts as well.
So that little exchange might lead Mr. Nelson to think, okay, this juror might be a good juror because she's going to be willing to listen to both sides. However, that's really kind of more like an aspirational answer that she gave. I think most people would give an answer that would be similar to that. Well, I would try to listen to both sides and help mediate between two friends that might have had some sort of conflict. So that answer doesn't really tell you that much.
And are you willing to re-examine your thoughts?
Yes.
Are you willing to listen to the other juror's opinion?
Yes.
So he's asked her another question that's really a question that would be really hard to say no to. Are you willing to re-examine your thoughts? And she says yes. But it's hard to imagine that some people would just say, no, I'm not willing to re-examine my thoughts. It's kind of the socially acceptable answer. So it doesn't really tell you much. It might lead Mr. Nelson to think, okay, this person is willing to listen to both sides. And so he might be leaning toward, okay, maybe this is a good juror for my side. I'm still listening to the tone of voice and I don't really like it. And I'm also not really learning that much from these answers here because they're really, like I said, the socially acceptable answers.
You were asked to state your opinions as to both Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd. And in terms of your opinion as to Mr. Chauvin, you indicated that it was a somewhat negative response.
Yes.
Okay.
So as I'm evaluating this prospective juror, I think about this is another red flag in my mind. She has a somewhat negative opinion of Mr. Chauvin. Now, the scale that the jurors had on their questionnaire included 5 categories: very negative, somewhat negative, neutral, somewhat positive, and very positive. So when I'm evaluating questionnaire responses, I'm looking for the extremes, the polar type answers. So if she were to say very negative, that's more telling to me than somewhat negative. I think probably a lot of people have a somewhat negative opinion of Mr. Chauvin. So it doesn't tell me a lot, but it does tell me that she's not neutral.
So the fact that you formed that opinion, and that opinion was negative to some degree because of what you saw on the video, and we'll talk about the video in a second, but because of what you saw on the video, you just thought that it was, as a human being, that it was hard to watch.
Yes.
And that it was longer than it needed to be.
Yes.
And that you felt that the defendant made a decision about how to treat this person that was inhumane.
Yes.
But why do you think it is that you didn't fully finish it?
I just couldn't watch it anymore.
Because you found it to be inhumane, correct?
Yes.
And again, you have a certain set of life experiences, right? Would you agree with me that you're not a police officer?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that you've never been trained in the arrest of an individual?
Yes.
And that there may be information, well, let me ask it this way. Would you be willing to let other information about police procedure, what happens before or after, all of these things potentially affect your decision? Would you allow your decision to be changed if you gathered more information?
What decision? I haven't made a decision yet.
No, I mean your opinion. I apologize.
Yes.
Okay, so you would be willing to keep an open mind, hear all of the evidence, right?
Yes.
You testify, or I keep saying testified. You told me earlier that when you were called upon to resolve this conflict between your two friends or colleagues, that it was important that you listen to both sides.
Yes.
Can you do that here?
Yes.
So that little clip was a little bit longer than the other clips, but I let it play for a reason because I think this is where Mr. Nelson made a crucial error. He just got through establishing that this potential juror thought that Mr. Chauvin treated Mr. Floyd in an inhumane way. She just got through saying that she couldn't watch the video all the way through because it was too disturbing. She clearly has some strong feelings associated with this case. And what he did was what is known as rehabilitation. So he said, but you'd still be able to keep an open mind and listen to both sides, wouldn't you? So instead of doing that, instead of getting her to admit that she could listen to both sides, which is what you want every juror to do and what a judge would expect jurors to do, is to listen to both sides and weigh the evidence, what he should have said instead was start to ask some more closed-ended questions and get this potential juror to talk herself off of the jury and demonstrate to the judge that she cannot be fair based on these feelings that she has about how she felt when she saw the video, how the emotions that it elicited in her, how she felt like Mr. Chauvin treated Mr. Floyd in an inhumane way. He should have started asking closed-ended questions that would go something like this. So given the way you felt when you watched that video, it brought out some strong feelings in you, didn't it? And she would say yes. Feelings that you kind of can't dismiss, right? And she would probably say yes. And those feelings affected you, didn't they? So much so that you couldn't finish watching the video. That's correct, isn't it? And she would say yes. And then he moves closer and closer to getting this juror to admit that based on the feelings and the emotions that she experienced when she watched that video, that it would make it almost impossible, if not impossible, to give Mr. Chauvin a fair trial. So his opportunity to get the judge to strike this juror, he just wiped away by rehabilitating that juror. So now, if he wants to get rid of her, he can't ask the judge to get rid of her. he has to do it himself and use one of his peremptory challenges. And remember, you only have a certain amount of peremptory challenges, and once you've used them all.
You were asked in the questionnaire about whether you talked about George Floyd's death with friends and family members, and you wrote, and what opinions you may have expressed, and you wrote confusion, sadness for everyone, and the need for possible police reform. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, conversation happened a lot in the news with friends, family, I think for most people. And I think when there wasn't an answer, we didn't know what was going on. And everyone saw the video and what's going on in the news. There was just a lot of confusion as to why.
Okay. What do you mean by the need for possible police reform?
Just that.
Just that it could be or may not be?
We need police reform.
Right. I mean, are you open to the possibility that police reform is not needed?
No.
So that exchange was pretty important, and for me, if I were the jury consultant on this case, that would almost be the nail in the coffin for me with this juror, where I would think this person has to go, and we would hopefully we would have asked the questions in a way, as I just outlined, that we'd be able to get the judge to remove her for cause. But if not, I think that I would probably put her very high on my strike list. And this is interesting, though. She just previously mentioned that she's open to listening to both sides. She kind of sees herself as a mediator, and she's open to listening to opinions from either side. She just now said that she would not be open to the idea that there is no need for police reform. So, and that goes back to what I said earlier. She gives these aspirational type answers, but in reality, she just demonstrated, at least to me in my mind, that she's not as open-minded as she thinks she is.
You indicated that you had, in fact, yourself participated in a peaceful BLM protest in Duluth, and you did not carry a sign.
Yes.
And that other people like your cousins, I believe, indicated that they had also participated in some marches.
They were in Minneapolis, yes.
Minneapolis. Okay. Why did you decide to go to that protest?
I just felt it was necessary to show my support.
Okay. Your support for whom?
Others who have been affected by similar situations.
Okay. So not simply this particular case.
And this case.
And this case. So again, you have an opinion about this case. You have an opinion about Mr. Chauvin. You have an opinion about the need for police reform. And all of those opinions are you are entitled to those opinions. Can you honestly tell us that you can set aside those strong opinions and judge this case on the facts alone?
Yes.
And here's another situation where Mr. Nelson completely missed his opportunity to get this juror to potentially talk herself out of being on this jury. He said, given everything that you've told us, can you honestly tell us that you will be a fair and impartial juror? Or he said something to that effect. And she says, yes. Well, of course she's going to say yes. That's what people say when they're asked if they can be fair and impartial. He should have gone down the close-ended question route where he builds up this whole idea that she's got these strong feelings and emotions associated with this case, and then start to ask her about how that's affected her, how those feelings are long-standing and they're deep-rooted and they've really impacted her, and she has high emotions about this, and keep going down that path and get her to say yes to all those questions, and then to ask the question, wouldn't it be difficult for you to give Mr. Chauvin a fair trial in this case? Or wouldn't it be difficult for you to see both sides in this case as starting out on equal footing? You would agree with me that that's true. It would be very difficult, wouldn't it? And that's how you start to get a juror to admit that it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, for them to be fair. And then you make a motion to strike this juror for cause, and you hope that the judge has heard enough where he understands that this juror just can't be fair. And then you don't have to waste a peremptory challenge. And something else, I don't know if you noticed, but her tone is still very unpleasant. She's defensive. It's not a very congenial type of a tone that she's exhibiting as she's answering these questions. And that's another thing that I would kind of keep in mind. And it started off that way, and it only seems to have gotten worse. So that, in addition to everything that she said, I would not want this person sitting on this jury if I were working for the defendant. And there are a couple other important pieces of information that came out during the questioning. One, she did go to a Black Lives Matter rally in Duluth, and her cousins did in Minneapolis. So that's just one more level that brings her closer to the top of a list that I would think would be on my strike list. For jurors, if I were picking this jury, it's one thing to think that maybe there should be some police reform and to be upset about what happened with George Floyd. It's another thing to make the effort to go to a Black Lives Matter rally to show your support, and that just raises her higher on the level of closer to an activist than just a person who has strong feelings about this case. So I would have her high on my strike list. And I would probably strike her. Now, granted, I haven't seen the rest of these jurors, and I wouldn't know what to compare her to, because the challenge is always you're comparing jurors with one another, and you're trying to get rid of the worst of the bad jurors, at least for your case. And that's a challenge. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it interesting or informative. Like it if you did, share it if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel. And I will see you next time.